here's my grandma. You can barely see her, it blends in with the dress. And then her sisters. So this is Cerise. So she's pregnant with Cerise in that one, and then here's Cerise. And then my grandma, and then this is her mom. And then this is Suspe. And I always think she really looks tired, because she was in the, during the war. There's a whole story about her in the book, about how she fled from soldiers shooting at them when they were up in the Red River Valley going to Canada. But anyway, that story really had a big impact on me. That made me think about this maternal line of resiliency. Once you know who you are, where you come from, no matter where you go, you belong. So that's part of the healing journey I feel like I've been on, reclaiming all of that. Even all of the struggles that our ancestors and relatives went through have teachings and values. And just the fact of them surviving, the resiliency that I like to hope or believe that is somehow threaded through our DNA. But you learn about that. You learn about that resiliency through those stories. I didn't hear stories growing up. So that's kind of the irony about all of this. I asked my mom one time, I was kind of working on a school project, and I asked her about stories and her education and schooling and all of that. And she told me that she primarily heard stories when she was sick in bed. And one of her younger sisters said they would also hear stories from their dad when they would drive over to Siston to see relatives. So I suppose it was a long drive. And then some time ago, I was listening to a recording and reading the transcript of my grandpa, Walter Labatt, who was born in 1900. And he shared that he heard stories just as an everyday thing growing up. So they didn't have television and all the things that we do today. So that was their form of entertainment. And he talks about how he would be in bed with his ma, and she would tell him stories about long time ago, history stories, and then our Ukdomi stories, our trickster stories. Ukdomi means spider. The thing about Ukdomi stories is they kind of, if you read Grasshopper Girl, it's like the next time they're going to tell story, it'll be another thing that Ukdomi does. So it just goes on and on, flows into, it never ends. The Ukdomi story never ends. So Ukdomi, trickster, Ukdomi means spider. And how I've been told is that he kind of shows up as a man, but he can shapeshift. And the Ukdomi stories are kind of like Aesop fables. They always have something to teach you. So those were the stories to teach young people about how to be and how not to be. And most of the time, Ukdomi does how not to be. Yeah, he's always doing goofy things. Maybe the worst characteristics in humanity is kind of how they show up.
They call Ukdomi. There must be a clown. Ukdomi means a spider. And those Indian ways, they always have some funny stories to tell. And it's got to be a funny thing. Like spider, it's a funny, they got all kinds of legs. So they call it Ukdomi. So here's the story again.
Doesn't he have a distinct voice?
Ukdomi, he's a lazy man. Beautiful music, power singing. Look then, by God, there was a buffalo skeleton, no meat on, just the bones, laying there. It's got big holes, big more open. That's where they were singing.
Oh.
He stopped and Kodai, my friends.
Oh, Koda.
What a beautiful music you're singing. Hey, I heard that way back, they said. I'm a good singer too, he said. I want to join you. Can I come in? I said, no, you can't come in. You're too big. You can't come in. Oktomi said, no, I want to come in. I want to join you.
So all these Ukdomi stories have little things. So this one was about, not being lazy, listening, and then telling of all the different trees, the names of them. For that research, I ended up just writing a big, long adult version of Grasshopper Girl. And I wanted to include not just the Ukdomi story, but a story about storytelling and the importance of it and when it occurred. And so that's where my mother's story comes in, about when she heard stories when she was sick in bed. And so Grasshopper Girl is in bed with achy legs because a storm is coming. And Grasshopper Girl is my mom's Dakota name, Sipsi Chada Wichiana. That's her Dakota name. So then eventually that became my research and a dissertation and all of that. And then at some point, one of my mentors and professors, Dr. Tom Peacock, and his wife Betsy started Black Bears and Blueberries Publishing in an effort to have more Dakota and Anishinaabe stories, children's stories, told by the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. When that call came out, then I was like, I sent it to Tom and he said, yes, you can let's do it. And he said, you'll have to decide what grade level you want to make this. And of course it has to be shortened because it was several pages long. So I decided on second grade, and then I learned from him how you can use different tools to make it at a second grade level. And then I went back in and then added the Dakota in there, sprinkled it in. So that's how Grasshopper Girl came about. Jordan Rogers, who's Lakota, which is just fantastic, young person, agreed to do the illustrations for this. So what I did is I sent her the long version because that has all of the description in it that she can pull to create the illustration. And then I sent her photos from my family of long time, like what my grandma and grandpa looked like in the 60s, and some photos of my aunt Deb, who's now passed away, when she was young. So Grasshopper Girl, she modeled her after my aunt Deb. She did a fantastic job, and there was one thing I had said to her was, the one thing about Ukdomi is no one really knows what he looks like. His face is never really revealed because it doesn't matter. What's important is what he does. His actions are what's important. So, and I love the way that she made him out to look like. When I was growing up, Dick and Jane and whatever, I couldn't even relate to that. So, how do we inspire and fuel that interest and spirit of being curious and creative? Well, part of that is how things are presented. People have to connect to it, have some connection to it. They say this: when an elder passes away, a whole library goes with them. And, all of the problems and issues we have in our world aren't going to be solved by just one view, one perspective. We all have something to contribute. So it's important that we really hold up and value diversity.
Cards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.